Welcome back to the Oak Leaves series, where each story introduces a different part of me that shaped how I learned to lead, protect, and show up in the world. Each of these parts carries a story, and each story reveals something deeper about how our inner world quietly influences our outer expression, and how meeting your own parts can do the same for you. When you were blamed for something that wasn't yours, think back to a time when you were blamed for something that wasn't your fault or something you had no control over. Not a simple misunderstanding that could be easily clarified, but a moment where the accusation landed on you before you even had a chance to respond, or where, even when you did, you weren't truly heard. It happens in your work. A boss or a colleague accuses, insinuates, criticizes, or reprimands you for something that wasn't yours or is completely lacking context. Maybe a narrative or a tone about your work emerges that does not reflect reality. In that moment, you're forced to decide, do you act on the urge to defend immediately, correct and record, and ensure others don't walk away with the wrong impression? Or do you let it slide and stay quiet? You become aware of how your defensiveness may be perceived. In other words, you'll be labeled aggressive, difficult, or insubordinate. If you're too forceful, you risk being labeled difficult or combative. Too restrained, and the story may take hold without your voice ever being fully heard. It happens also in your childhood. You took the fall or the blame for a sibling or something that they did. You were accused of something you could not even explain your way out of. It also happens in everyday events. Someone cuts you off in traffic and then flips you off. What lingers is not just the moment itself, but the imprint it leaves behind. Over time, these experiences can subtly shape how we show up in our life and work. We may begin to over-prepare, anticipating misinterpretation before it happens. We may over-explain, attempting to close every gap in understanding. Or we may pull back, choosing caution over expression or silence over risk. Or we may just simply fight back. Somewhere along the way, a quiet agreement forms internally. I will never let that happen to me again. So meet Cougar, the 15-year-old part of me who refused to be misunderstood. There is a 15-year-old part of me I named Cougar after my high school mascot. She was a sophomore on the varsity basketball team, a role I felt incredibly proud of. I loved being around the older girls, learning from them, studying how they carried themselves, and trying to rise to their level. I wanted to impress them, to belong, to be seen as someone who deserved to be there. Being the youngest on the team felt like a gift. It gave me a sense of importance and possibility, as if my athletic ability had elevated how I saw myself. In many ways, it became a place where I could be seen, feel strong, capable, and valued, especially at a time when other parts of my life were beginning to unravel. Cougar came to life during a time in my life that, until then, had been defined by stability and security in my family and home life. This was the year, however, my parents announced they were separating. I had two younger sisters, and while I did not consciously choose it, I found myself stepping into a role that required me to hold far more emotional weight than I was equipped to carry. I was trying to make sense of what was happening and hold space for my baby sisters, for my parents, and for myself. It's important for me to say that my childhood was not marked by what we often categorize as overt or big T traumas. I was raised in a loving, stable two-parent home. But when that foundation suddenly changed, when the structure I believed to be permanent because it was all I ever knew began to shift, the internal impact was incredibly disorienting to my whole system. As we've seen in the journeys of my other parts, our experiences aren't only shaped by what we often label as big T traumas, such as abuse, neglect, or extreme adversity. We are just as deeply impacted by little T traumas, shifts in our environment, moments of instability, or the stories and meanings we begin to form about the world around us. It was within this context that an ordinary, everyday moment became something much more significant and left a deep imprinted wound on Cougar. Very much like the imprints that landed on my other parts we've already met, such as Curly, Snowbird, Opie, and Huffy. Cougar was about to hold on to a deep wound. The moment that imprinted everything. One morning, I needed to be at school early for a weekend basketball tournament. In the midst of everything happening at home, somehow our car keys were misplaced and we ended up running late to catch the team bus. The whole JV and varsity teams and coaches were forced to wait for me. As a 15-year-old, I had no control over the situation. I could not drive myself. I could not change the circumstances. When I stepped on the team bus, everyone was already seated. My teammates were relaxed, talking, laughing, and having fun just hanging out as a team. But before I could even make my way down the aisle of the bus, the head coach stopped me. What followed was not a question or an inquiry. It was a public reprimand. He raised his voice in front of the whole team and the coaching staff and began yelling at me, listing off what he believed my quote-unquote late behavior represented. He called me undisciplined, unreliable, selfish, and insubordinate. The words were delivered with certainty as though the narrative had already been decided. They landed on me in a way that made me believe the whole team would now reject me due to something I had no control over. First, I was carrying the weight of what was happening in my family and trying not to make that situation worse for my parents by putting more pressure on them to get me to the bus. But now I was faced with dealing with this public shaming. Something in me snapped, and my Jersey Italian girl came out. I turned to him and said, "Don't you dare blame me. It wasn't my fault. I don't even drive." And he fired back even louder, "Stop being a victim." Standing there, I felt something rise in me that I could not contain. It was not just about being late. It was the accumulation of everything I had been carrying quietly at home. Fear, confusion, responsibility, and a deep sense of instability. In that moment, all of it surfaced at once. How could he blame me for something so trivial and not even listen to my explanation? How could he pass judgment on who I was as a person based on this one moment? Couldn't he see everything I was already carrying, the things I had no control over, let alone something as simple as finding the car keys any faster? I just kept walking to the back of the bus and sat down, feeling the heat of embarrassment and anger move through my body. And then, as if to reinforce his message with another penalty, I was benched for the whole game. Looking back, I can see that impact of that moment extended far beyond that day. It was not just about what happened on the bus. It was about that meaning I made from it. I internalized the belief that no one was going to defend me, that if I wanted to be understood, not blamed, and given a break when I'm handling so much, and often for others, then I would have to ensure it myself. That I could not rely on others to see the full picture or to ask the questions that might reveal it. From these beliefs, two primary responses began to take shape in how I addressed myself in the world. My embedded trauma responses. The first was a fight response. I became quick to defend myself, often reacting before fully processing what was being said. There was an urgency to correct, to clarify, to make sure that no one walked away with a version of me that wasn't true. The second was a fawn response. If defending myself did not resolve the situation, I would shift over into overcorrection. I would work harder, communicate more, and attempt to eliminate any possibility of misinterpretation moving forward. Both responses were rooted in the same underlying drive, to avoid being misunderstood or wrongly blamed, and that I will never be seen as weak. These patterns did not remain confined to my adolescence. They followed me into adulthood, into professional environments, into leadership roles. They influenced how I communicated, how I prepared, and how I responded under pressure. What Cougar taught me about leadership? It was only through deep inner work, through taking the time to meet and understand this part of myself, that I began to see Cougar differently. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't overreacting. She was protecting and keeping me and all my other parts safe. But she was also keeping me on high alert. She was responding to a moment where she felt unseen, unheard, and unjustly held responsible. At the same time, I could also see the cost of operating from that place for too long. When we're constantly prepared to defend ourselves, we can lose access to something equally important: the ability to pause, to assess, and to choose our response rather than be driven by it. One of the most meaningful practices that has emerged for me from this work is deceptively simple. In moments where I feel that familiar urge, the sense that something is being placed on me that doesn't belong, I say to myself, pause, what a pleasure. It is not a dismissal of the situation, nor is it an attempt to minimize it. It's a reframe, a way of recognizing that the moment in front of me is an opportunity to respond differently than I once did, to observe what is happening without immediately absorbing it, to discern what is mine and what is not, to put up boundaries and deflect what is not mine to own, and to communicate calmly with intent and impact. This pause has changed the way I lead, the way I communicate, and the way I hold myself in moments that once would have triggered an immediate and negative reaction. A question to bring this back to you: where in your life or work are you still reacting to a moment where you were unfairly blamed or misinterpreted? Where have you learned to defend yourself before fully being heard? Taken on responsibility that was never yours? Shifted your behavior to avoid being misperceived? And what would change if you paused just long enough to decide what actually belongs to you and what doesn't? Because not everything that lands on you is yours to carry.